What are the challenges that have been, let's say, solved, and what are the others that still need some love to be better at?
Well, I think a lot of anytime you can remove human error, that's going to be a win in our industry. So many times we have folks with good intentions, just they're doing too much, and they make an error on an entry somewhere, or they forget one piece of documentation when speaking with regulators, or there's something missing there. So anytime we can remove that and have automated systems that look for things quickly and without the need for human interaction, the better off we're going to be. We've found that pretty clearly. And in our industry, that's, I think, the next frontier, is to ensure that the routine activities can be automated to remove human interaction and let the folks do what they do best, which is focus on manufacturing product and paying attention to the specifications required, instead of having to document everything manually. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is to remove that human interaction. And I think that is the key to meeting the regulatory pieces.
Welcome to Digital Leaders Club. I'm Guillaume Duchesneau, CEO and founder at Ingeno. This show is built for the leaders running real-world operations, the ones whose plants, lines, and teams have to keep producing while everything around them is being asked to modernize. Today, I'm joined by David Meseth, Industrial Operations Finance Director at Verbeck. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, David, before we get started and we get into operational stuff, how did you end up in manufacturing? And, was it a deliberate path, or did kind of life or industry pull you in along the way?
That's a very interesting question. When I graduated college, I wasn't certain what I wanted to do with this information that I had. I had a degree in economics and finance, and I was basically looking for a job. My job landed me in implementation of SAP software. And at the time, implementation of SAP software on the manufacturing or costing side was pretty rare. Not a lot of people understood the system. It was kind of a new horizon that folks were digging into. So I had a great opportunity to learn this at the ground level and begin implementing it in manufacturing sites around the world for my first organization. After about 18 months, I realized I didn't know much. I knew the software and I understood the bells and whistles of the software, but I had no idea what cost accounting meant. So I left and I joined an organization to become a cost accountant, to learn the fundamentals. And that is where my career took off. And that was about 25 years ago. And I've gone to various organizations from there, learning more about the intricacies that they use within product costing, within manufacturing accounting, how they use information to drive decision making. So I've built that up along the way. So it was not intentional, but it has served me well, and it fits what I enjoy doing.
So tell our listeners about the operation, about Verbeck. What do you guys do kind of at a high level? What the scale, the product you're selling, and how you're structured?
Yeah, so Verbeck is a French-owned organization. It's about 1.5 billion euro. We're in many, many countries around the world. We have various offerings in the animal health industry. So our organization produces and imports products for animal health. And that can be anything from pharmaceuticals to non-pharmaceutical dental products that help your dogs, your cats enjoy a better life. So we are also very attuned to veterinarians. We service many veterinarians around the world. And in the U.S., our organization is not only focused on veterinarians, but we've also have expanded into the retail space. So we are online. We have an online presence through our partners, Chewy. We are on Amazon, and we are offering quite a few opportunities for animal health. And again, prescription-based, non-prescription-based, but that is our focus, making pets and people's lives better.
Nice. And tell me, what does a typical week look like for you personally? So I want to understand how you spend your time typically. So not what you put on your LinkedIn profile, the real thing, right?
Yeah, the real thing. It's never the same. A typical week is we start the week to understand what we have yet to do for our scheduling. So how has our manufacturer performed to a certain point in the given month so that we understand where we could land financially for the end of the month. And production, as it feeds through, will offset any spending we have. That's the basic process we use. The more we put into inventory, the better off we're going to be when it comes to offsetting that spending with absorption. So starting the week, it's grounding us in that, and then moving into the rest of the week. Then we, from a finance point of view, we start looking at, are things in the right place? Running our reconciliation process for inventory. Have we managed our costs appropriately? We look at spending later on in the week. Pardon me. So every week we look at spending to ensure that we are on track on a purchasing requisition process. So it again, to start the week, we assess where we are. As the week goes forward, we spend time on the middle of the week on not only the reconciliations at a detail level, but then we're looking at projects. What are our continuous improvement projects that we are participating in with the production and engineering team? That includes anything from efficiency opportunities to capital. So Tuesday, Wednesday, we're really spending that time. Thursday, we're really looking at our spending, doing a deep dive analysis on where we sit for the week, in addition to looking at those continuous opportunities. Friday is assessing where we're going to start the next week and how we're winding down the current week. And throughout that, there are always opportunities that pop up where somebody is unable to execute a transaction in the system, where we assist with that. But we also have to keep our eyes on the prize to ensure that we lend the right help so that we're teaching them at the same time as solving their concerns. It is inevitable that the finance team, accounting team in any organization understands the systems better than the production and execution team on the floor. That seems to be a very common thread that I've run into. So they will execute things and move things out in the system and not understand the financial ramifications until they come talk to us, and we kind of figure that out. So that's kind of a typical week. I know I threw a lot of generalities in there, but it goes through that cycle pretty much every week where we assess, we contribute, we focus, and then we kind of close out the week so that we can move into the next week. Now, every week is different. We could end up having a Monday through Friday week. We could have a Monday through Saturday week. It all depends on what is going on and the importance that the organization is driving.
And what part of your operation you're kind of the most satisfied with right now? Something your team has built or figured out, without maybe going to specifics, but let's say in general, what you feel you guys have nailed and you're proud of?
Well, one thing that we are very good at is understanding what our scheduling is doing, and we have a good network of information flow to get where we're sitting and what we need to do to achieve the customer needs for our products. We understand our lead times very well. We understand how the material moves. We understand, without any production difficulties, how much we can do in a given period of time. So that part is working very well. There's always opportunities to get better, and you use the word satisfied. And in my role, I'm unfortunately never satisfied. There's always more that can be done. It's quite frustrating for people that work with me, because it's not about what we have done. It's about what we're going to do, and that's the drive that we all continue to have in a continuous improvement operation.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It seems that you guys are good at continuously improve your processes and your posture, right?
Yeah, and you have to be, because no one is standing still in any industry. There's always somebody that's got a leg up, and information flow is imperative as it relates to what I do. I don't make anything. I don't ship anything. I'm a service provider of information, and the better I can provide that information in a more succinct fashion so decisions can be made, the better off the rest of the organization will be with that information, because then decisions can be made clearly and we can move forward to the next opportunity that comes up.
Mm. And then on the flip side, let's say, what's the hardest part of your job right now that someone outside manufacturing probably wouldn't appreciate?
The driving that understanding. So prioritization, that's always the my priorities are not the priorities of the rest of the organization. It's when I need information, teaching them as to why I need the information is the most difficult part, and it always has been. So the priorities of the organization overall are aligned. Things like safety and quality and customer service. Those are the top priorities. But when I come up with something that I see in the system, or I see something odd in what we're doing, if I need to get somebody's attention, everybody is so stretched. The difficult part is taking the time to help them understand why it's important to me and why their input is valid in what I'm looking for. So that's always been the most difficult part, the most challenging.
Interesting. Interesting. So let's talk about quality and compliance. So one thing I hear a lot from operations or quality or compliance leaders is that documentation and stay compliant is a big challenge, right? So every facility says that they're compliant, but there's so much documentation that you need to put together, and there's still, let's say, sometimes batches that go out of spec and they go to waste, that kind of stuff, right? So what do you think it looks like at Verbac or in your industry in general? What are the challenges that have been, let's say, solved, and what are the others that still need some love to be better at?
Well, I think a lot of anytime you can remove human error, that's going to be a win in our industry. So many times we have folks with good intentions, just they're doing too much, and they make an error on an entry somewhere, or they forget one piece of documentation when speaking with regulators, or there's something missing there. So anytime we can remove that and have automated systems that look for things quickly and without the need for human interaction, the better off we're going to be. We've found that pretty clearly. And in our industry, that's, I think, the next frontier, is to ensure that the routine activities can be automated to remove human interaction and let the folks do what they do best, which is focus on manufacturing product and paying attention to the specifications required, instead of having to document everything manually. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is to remove that human interaction. And I think that is the key to meeting the regulatory pieces. Now, one could argue that the regulatory activities change quite frequently, and we're not exactly certain where the goalposts are. However, that's not necessarily the biggest problem. The biggest problem is getting all of that regulatory information and compliance need understood. And if we can automate that understanding and drive that into our processes more completely with automation, it just helps us avoid any concerns going forward.
And how can I say that? What's the with with your experience? Where do you see is the hardest part of that? Right? Where, so you say automating is the key here to remove human errors, right? As much as possible. What part of compliance is harder to automate?
Anything that requires judgment.
Mm.
So there are some gray areas. There are very clear specifications that have to be met quality wise, but there are gray areas where things are not specifically laid out, where we can run into trouble. And that piece where there is judgment, we have to find guideposts to know what that judgment range would be, and have that documentation available. And if it falls outside that range, then the judgment is less, and we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about it. So, and that's been everything. When I worked in other organizations, it's the same way. Whether you're working in a pharma organization or you're working in a CPG food manufacturer, if there's judgment involved, then it becomes a long, drawn-out process, and it does waste time. So eliminating that judgment factor, or limiting it, pardon me, is the most difficult part to get everyone aligned, especially if there is turnover. Turnover in an organization when it comes to those types of things, because somebody coming from the outside may have a different idea of what that is, and they may bring upon their own experiences and try and use their judgment in the way that we have used it in the past. And unless that's documented and very clear, you can run into a myriad of problems.
Can you give an example of a task that requires judgment in your industry?
Well, yeah, of course. So in manufacturing of food, there's always needs to meet, because those have to be documented through the FDA. In situations where there is a production that doesn't meet a harmful specification that is not necessarily regulated, that's where the judgment comes in. Let's talk about color, for example. If there is a color that is slightly different than what the specification is, then the range of that color deviation can cause fits related to production and whether you're going to waste the entire product or not. So range of color when you're manufacturing is a good one to talk about when you're talking about judgment. So an example of this is 10 years ago or so, I was working as a plant controller in a facility, and we made a batch of product that was slightly off color. Now, the reason it was slightly off color was an ingredient was not contributing the correct percentage of impact when it relates to color. Now, that could have been because it was a goofy lot of product that when we tested it, the visualization of that was fine. And it met that the execution specification when it came to dissolution or things like that, that was not going to cause an issue. However, at the end result, the color was a bit off of the product, and we had to have a lot of conversation about what to do with that. So when that happens, conversations about customer needs come into consideration immediately. So it was immediately deemed that the product was safe. There was not going to be a concern with any safety of the product going into the market. It was a perception when they buy one and then they buy the other, the next, it seems a little bit different. That differential can cause customer concern, and therefore that can drive customers away. So there was a lot of conversation on whether or not we should move forward. And fortunately or unfortunately, we decided to not ship that product because the color was judged to be too different to go into the marketplace, and it was a scrap situation.
Interesting case. Is it something, in your opinion, that where AI or computer vision could help with?
Absolutely. Because what you do is you make those guideposts, and everyone agrees on the guideposts of what is acceptable from a color spectrum, and everyone agrees to that. And if the machinery or the visualization technology is verified in a certain period of time, whether it's quarterly or whatever the necessary piece is, if everybody agrees to that, that takes the judgment out. And you don't have to have the back and forth and the conversation about money. Because in my belief, when it comes to quality, money is not a conversation piece. That's not a piece of the need for judgment. When it comes to quality, there is or there is not. It meets or it does not. And that would help tremendously.
Yeah, and I guess that batch costs so much that investing in that kind of system is kind of a no-brainer if it can help, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of that, at Verbeck, or maybe in your industry in general, I'd like to have your perspective on how fast typical manufacturing operations like yours are able to react fast enough to avoid a batch going out of spec and having to be either go to waste or sold to a lower price. So how fast typical organizations in your sector are able to react, in your opinion?
Well, it's pretty quick. It's throughout the process. There are verifications that are had, whether that's time, temperature, visualization. It's done throughout the process to avoid those types of situations. So you wouldn't have something that comes out at the end with where we'd have to make a decision at the end to throw it all away, or God forbid, we ship it to a customer. We do as much as we can throughout the process to avoid those situations. So how fast? I would say it's almost immediate, but in extreme situations, it would be within a day or two.
Let's say from the answer you just gave, most facilities we visit have hundreds of sensors, equipment, emit, lots of data. Many organizations we work with don't really consume this data. They're there, but they go sometimes in some BI software, but they are consumed either never or very late in the process. So let's say temperature, error codes from machines, that kind of stuff. So it exists, but it's not watched, or it's watched a bit late. How do you see this is going in Verbac or in your industry in general?
We're finding more ancillary data that is needed. So I think the crux of your question is, historically, we've only looked at the critical control points, for example, time, temperature, et cetera. But there's probably other things that are being measured that we have not used. And the key to success, I think, long term is using that, finding, well, it's measured for a reason. What is the reason? And what are we going to do with it? That's the next frontier of quality and capability, because it might not be a situation where it's going to throw something out of spec right now, but it might be a vibration or a deviation that is so minor in nature that increases over time that if we don't watch that trend, we're going to find ourselves in a problem with at the end with the critical control. And I can speak to a situation that I've experienced in my past life when I worked in a CPG organization. It was the new vibration analysis related to maintenance of parts, maintenance of failures. So we started measuring vibration of motors and conveyors. And at the time, as a finance guy, I didn't understand the value of that. I didn't really think that there was a whole lot of value, because we had a very strong PM program that was pretty much spot on in avoiding failures. What this did was made that even more robust, because we avoided significant downtime for the PM, even because we were able to change out a portion of the entirety more frequently and avoid and maximize that period of time before we actually had to do the full PM. So that is an example of monitoring something that we had never monitored before. We had the sensors in place for quite some time, but then we started understanding what that was going to give us. So that's an example, but I can probably think of 15 or 20 different examples of things that we measure now that we're not using yet, but should and will be important in the future.
Interesting. So that brings me another question about unplanned downtime, right? So those cost a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So how well, let's say, predictive maintenance, just like what you described, is pretty much that, right? You measure vibration or temperature in normal conditions, and at some point, some of those values change. And for a let's say a system, for an AI, it means you should look at that machine, something weird, right? So how mature is your industry using this technology?
It's not yet, because it all costs money. It all this digitization of information, it all costs money, and you need expertise. So the organizations that have been on the forefront of this and jumped in with both feet have an advantage, not only in capital resources, but also in the desire for this information. And historically, what you will find in our industry, in the animal health industry, is when these new technologies are available, there's skepticism, because the investment in the organization historically has been very limited. We would like to spend our money on product and quality focus and R&D, not necessarily on the execution. But what we're finding is that the execution, if it's done wrong or you have unplanned downtime, you're missing opportunities to contribute dollars to the future of what R&D could be. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to change that mindset and be far more proactive when it comes to implementing these digital structures, these warning signs throughout the manufacturing organization sooner rather than later, to allow the future. Because if you make that investment now, you're avoiding costs that would have happened that if they're not in your P&L, you can use that money for somewhere else. It's kind of it's a soft intangible, because you've never done it before. It's a soft investment, and that's where folks get nervous. So the belief in the technology has to be proven many times before that is done, and that has held us back as a industry.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's no clear and direct impact on the bottom line, right? It's you gotta have faith that you'll have less downtimes, you'll have less maintenance costs, and for you to try to see it, you need to try it, right? There's no, or you can talk to people that have done it.
That's
right?
correct.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And what you can do is you look at the industry outputs, but then there's a bit of skepticism to that, because you see it, you hear it, but you feel like you're being sold something that you haven't experienced before. So it does become kind of concern.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's talk a bit about people and knowledge. So we hear that a lot in manufacturing, at least in Canada, and I'm curious to have your perspective on that in the US. So the labor shortage is real, and you know people that have a certain age have lots of experience, and when they leave the company, they retire. That knowledge kind of goes away unless you've been able to capture it before people go. So is this something that is also there in your organization or in your industry? How do you feel it?
Yes. Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. There's tribal knowledge. There just is. Folks that have been around for 10, 15 years in an organization have experienced things that somebody coming in is never going to experience. So passing on that tribal knowledge is very, very difficult. The best organizations can do a great job of having on the job training OJTs documented, but even that's not going to solve everything, because I remember an operator that was retiring. I worked in a facility in Pennsylvania. He was retiring after 35 years. And that operator could hear when the machinery was having a problem. He could hear it. That wasn't documented. He would hear a squeak and know that in 10 minutes, he's going to go have to clear out this can jam. He just knew it. So I use that as an example of getting that tribal knowledge documented is almost impossible. Again, the on the job training and on the job documentation can only go so far. And then the bigger trouble is, how do you take that information and upload it into an individual coming into the organization while they are trying to learn on the job? They're not going to go home and read a manual. They have to have you have to pair them with somebody who understands what's
Mhm.
going on. And that's, with labor costs being a focus point, it's difficult to hire somebody for 6 months to partner with somebody before they go out. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. The best thing you can do is drive consistency in your organization and document what you can succinctly so that they can pay attention to things. But there are elements that will be missed.
Right. And it's still intangible, right? If you take, let's say, the younger person that comes in and you pair them with a senior person, then you could argue that the hypothesis is that person's gonna learn faster and is gonna capture more knowledge from that person, and then we're gonna be in a better place in the future. But again, it's an intangible, right? It's hard to let's say measure the investment and the return on the investment. Well, it's easy to measure the investment. It's harder to get the ROI to truly measure it. So I can understand that it can be a struggle for organizations.
Yes, and it's going to be a struggle for quite some time. Yes.
If you could fix one thing about how your operation runs right now, what would it be?
I think, and this is not just in the execution of manufacturing. This is within engineering and supply chain, et cetera. I think being less reactive and more proactive, having more of a strategy for the longer term. And longer term doesn't need to be 5 years. It could be 18 months, but having more of an 18-month rolling conversation in this, it's difficult to do because you have to take time away to build that. And many organizations are not adept at doing this. And this is pervasive throughout the industry. I've always said that the best organizations are focused on the longer term, and the short term doesn't matter so much as long as you're driving toward that long term. However, what happens is the short term issues cause a change in what your long term view would be. So if I had the opportunity to change things, I would have a reset on what the long term view is, ensure that everyone understands, not necessarily is aligned with, but understands what that strategy is and drives toward that, regardless of what happens on a day-to-day basis.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So from there, where do you see the biggest opportunity for animal health and pharma manufacturers to compete differently over the next few years? Not necessarily just incremental, but a really something that would change stuff, right? That would make you or your competitor the first ones to do it in a very good position compared to the others. That's a tricky
I think
one.
more immediacy of information.
Yeah.
It is. That is a tricky one. It's immediacy of information and the importance of different information coming at you. And what I mean by that is both internally in the organization, seeing feedback from situations around us, being able to digest that more quickly and execute. So that goes back to digitization. What's important? Why is it important? How quickly can we digest that to move forward and find out if we have a problem? So that piece internally is a game changer. That's really the new frontier of our industry when it comes to manufacturing. Now, you mentioned how can a company move that move forward within the overall industry? Well, that goes back to information to customers. Customers need to understand the benefits more completely of the products that we provide without bias. And I think that there's because our what we make is probably, in my opinion, better than what other companies make. However, how do we get that understanding to the consumer so they're more willing to purchase ours versus another? I mean, that's the big question for the marketing team. It has been for ages. However, with the new age of information and digitization, we can find an advantage that you could use vet recommendations all day long. Everyone uses vet recommendations. However, how do we get more consumer recommendations? Because it's so immediate in the marketplace. It's immediate. How do we harness that? And I think that the companies that can harness that and that word of mouth better will succeed.
That makes sense. Because when you purchase stuff, for example, on Amazon, one of the things you look at before you click buy is the ratings, right? So that kind of thing, you mean?
Well, ratings are great when people put ratings in, but what consumers do not see is the purchasing patterns. So if our product is selling more quickly than another product, there's a reason. But consumers don't see that. They don't see that information. How can we get that to them more frequently? Because and it's frequency of purchase isn't necessarily the key, but the reasons why people are purchasing would be fantastic. So if there was a way to use online information, I'm purchasing this and this is why, and then get that why to the next consumer, that's better than ratings and reviews, in my opinion. As a pet owner, that's what I would look for.
So we're at the lightning round of questions, David. So before I let you go, quick questions. Just tell us what first thing comes to your mind. No overthinking. Just quick answers. We're almost at time, and I want to be respectful of your time.
Okay.
What's the most overrated thing in manufacturing technology right now?
TVs.
TVs on the shop floor. TVs, you mean?
The big displays. Yeah, the fancy
Interesting.
big displays.
All right, that's an interesting one. One system your operation couldn't run without, and don't tell me TV is dead.
Could not run without?
Could not run without. Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
What technology? I mean, our HMIs.
Best plant tour you ever had. What made it stand out?
I toured a food manufacturing plant, and this was 15 years ago. I toured a food manufacturing plant that was the cleanest plant I have ever been in, and the quality used, and they were making lasagnas. And there were a lot of people running around. So you ask the question, with the number of people here, how can you keep it so clean, and how can you have so many quality verifications that make sense? It was very, very manual, but it was incredible. And after that, I never purchased any type of lasagna again. I always focused on buying that one. That was the most amazing thing I ever saw.
That's a great answer. Amazing. One last one for you. What do great operations leaders do that average ones don't?
Listen. You can tell all day long. You can say these are the priorities, this is what we're going to do. But great operations leaders listen. They listen to the people around them. They listen to the other departments, and they digest before they answer. As I mentioned before, nobody's priorities are the same. In a manufacturing facility, you've got 15,000 things happening at any given time, and you really want to push what you think is the most important. But the most important thing is listening and hearing. Not only just listening, but also hearing and being able to have that discourse, take the time to understand why it is important somewhere else, because you can be wrong in what you believe, but you have to listen for it in order for people to trust that what you're saying makes sense.
Great answer. I like that. David, this was a genuinely great conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for being candid about how you work and what you do. It's really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
This is exactly what this show's for, right? Share and yeah. So tell us, David, where can our listeners find you or follow you and see what Verbeck is doing and building?
I have a LinkedIn profile. Absolutely hit up my LinkedIn profile and explore the Verbeck LinkedIn profile website. It's a wonderful company, wonderful opportunities, and we're growing as an organization. And I hope to continue that trend.
All right, thanks. And thanks for listening to Digital Leaders Club. If you're a manufacturing leader dealing with any of the challenges David and I talked about today, we'd love to continue the conversation with you. You can find us at ingeno. Until next time, thank you very much.